First, all those stories at the very beginning of the Bible, in the first 10 or 11 chapters of Genesis, are perfectly consistent with science, just not our modern science. They are consistent with the science known at the time of Moses, about 3,000 years ago, to the Egyptians and Mesopotamians. I became an atheist when I was 17 years old, and I found Jesus while I was working on my PhD in theoretical physics. I absolutely believe that there are pivotal facts that change the course of conversations. Knowing that those stories are, in fact, firmly rooted in the science of their time changes the course of the conversation and makes you ask, well, how are those stories different? And it's actually then you learn from those differences what the stories are really about and why they're in the Bible, because they change things around in a substantial way. And of course, I post about that frequently. I've written a whole book on the subject, which isn't published yet, maybe in 2026. And I'm actually working on a long form video for YouTube that's all about those first passages in Genesis and comparing those to the scientific beliefs of the Egyptians. So that's the first thing I noticed in your video. And by the way, thank you for the kind tone and respectful tone of that video. I'm not used to getting that. So the other thing that I heard you mention was you said that there are no contemporaneous accounts of Jesus. That's not really true. So it depends, of course, on what you mean by contemporaneous. If you mean writings that were written during his lifetime, then you are correct. If, though, you mean by contemporaneous, within the lifetimes of people who knew him, then you are wrong. So, fact, pivotal, direction-changing fact, all of the primary historical accounts of Julius Caesar were written by people who were born between 100 and 200 years after Caesar's death. All of the New Testament was written within the first century. Possibly a little bit of what John wrote falls slightly after the first century. The vast majority of the New Testament was written within about 30 years of the crucifixion by people who either saw it or who knew lots of people who saw it. And that is actually highly unusual within the context of historical records. So you may not want to believe them. That's a completely different subject. But even most atheist historians believe that Jesus was a real person and that the teachings that he gave are actually accurately reflected in the Bible.